Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to an episode of The Way of the Force. And with me today is Ty Black. Hi, Ty. You've never been on this segment before.
Yeah, it was just weird, right?
Well, you're welcome, like, anytime. I just, I always, I'm worried about your time. I'm like, I could talk to you, like, every time.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
we could talk, like, nonstop about this all the time on any subject. It's insane. But
yeah, this is an interesting one, though, because it kind of ties into our Power of Myth and Symbolism series that we've been doing and kind of where we've gotten to mentally together.
Yeah,
so,
it's definitely been like a journey, because we did the Shadow episode, and then soon after that we did the conversation with Josh about the Minotaur in the maze, and then shortly after that we did the conversation about Divine versus Dark Union, and we kind of went on this little journey together about what the Force is going to become after Tross, and like what it is now, and what are all of these symbols that we've talked about before, but they mean something a little different to us now with kind of our journey.
Yeah. With our own conversations about this, we've been able to process it a little bit. And in some ways, it's kind of what the creators have intended for us, which I'm sure they're proud of.
I'd like to think so.
for picking up things that they've done like 10 years ago.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So what is today's episode? Again, like, I just want to frame this that I very much think that the Force is going to change after The Rise of Skywalker. And although they might go back to the traditional thoughts of what the Force is and all those things, I just wanted to lay the groundwork in this series about what is it now and what does it mean now and how does it affect us, and in universe, of course, as well as, like, kind of what is it trying to say to us, because that's always what George intended, is that he was trying to help frame these kind of basic human moral questions in this grandiose universal scale.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, there's been a lot of really, really, really good conversations happening on Twitter lately with a lot of really amazing people who are just got these amazing ideas and these amazing threads of meta thought. And I haven't been, like, on them a lot because y'all tend to talk really, really late at night. I guess y'all are all in, like, a different time zone than me. But I will wake up the next day and it'll be like 5 a.m. my time, and it'll say, like, this was 2 hours ago that y'all were talking about it, or, a few hours ago. And I'm like, okay, well, that conversation's over. They're all asleep. But, it's amazing threads waiting for me about, what are the struggles of these characters, and how does it connect to the Force, and how does that connect to, like, what the overall lesson is in this particular part of it, and what does that mean for episode 9? And it's so amazing. So I just wanted to say that, because it more so as we get closer to the final film, I can see these conversations continuing after the film, and I know a lot of people have been having a lot of thoughts about that lately, like, oh, what's going to happen after all this is over? Well, it's probably going to continue, because if the Force changes, and if we are introduced to new characters, there's a whole universe of meta thought waiting beyond 9 for us.
What does it mean now? Yeah, exactly. And I very much think that we might go on past Tross, The Rise of Skywalker, with new thoughts, etc., on this new world that's happening. And we'll get a little bit into that, because it is a very meta thought understanding of what Ty and I have talked about that we're going to talk about with you. But, I also think they might simultaneously go back to the past.
Yeah. And
kind of talk about the beginning of this question of what happened, how we're in this situation, things like that. So
yeah, I see that.
Interesting stuff. And we don't know. We won't know until they tell us, basically, officially.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We are taking on what some people call the world between worlds.
Yes.
But it's more than that.
Yes.
It's more than that. It's really interesting, because I've listened to Dave Filoni talk a lot. It's like one of my favorite things is to hear him not say things.
Yeah, hear him answer a question without answering the question.
Yeah. But interestingly, from the beginning, so from when he started to really tackle these questions with George Lucas, with the Mortis arc, on what they are, he's incredibly consistent. And not only is the World Between Worlds and Mortis similar, and we're going to talk about how, they are conceptually very similar. So I'm using quotes, but there is something going on that is the same. There's also instances that we see throughout the saga and throughout character, I don't know, when characters get to play a little bit more with the mystical stuff of the Force. And we're going to have a lot of caveats. But first, I created a supercut.
Yes.
Of Dave Filoni and some of the other creators of Star Wars talking about this concept. And it bounces between kind of three places in particular. I could have grabbed some Lost Missions stuff from Yoda, which is very similar again, but I wanted to focus on these two things more directly. So World Between Worlds and Mortis. And it's pulled from kind of all over the place. So let's listen to that now.
I mean, where they are, is any of that really important? Implicit knowledge, not implicit knowledge.
Here we go.
Is there a place? Is it in your mind? People want to know these things. I appreciate that. You know, for me to explain it is just so not as interesting as watching the show again and again and again. And like everything I really learned from Star Wars, I learned watching George's movies. It's all in there. It's not a mystery. If you pay attention and if you ask yourself the right questions, then the answers are provided. So the answers are all in there. And sometimes you just have to redefine the way you think something is it being literal or not? And
in the Mortis trilogy, Christian Taylor, the writer, and I were discussing these stories after George had laid them out, and we were discussing how do we conquer this and how do we bring it all together to make it make sense and still maintain some kind of continuity with the other Star Wars films, with something this supernatural. I would just tell Christian, you have to think of it like these are 3 entire episodes that take place in the tree when Luke is on Dagobah. This is all spiritual. This is all metaphor. This is all symbolic in some way. Ultimately, the dagger of Mortis is really just more of a metaphorical device. If we branch out our discussion from the dagger as a metaphor, then I can tell you the many things in this arc of stories is a metaphor. Everything is symbolic of everything that takes place in all 6 Star Wars films.
The painting on the wall of the temple is a representation of the Mortis Gods seen in the Clone Wars. Can you give us some insight on the Mortis Gods for those who need a refresher?
The Mortis Gods were a concept created by George when we worked on Clone Wars, and he had us do this arc that basically dealt with Anakin being tested by these Force wielders, George called them, to see if he was this prophesized chosen one, which seemed to be a common prophecy among many different Force wielding groups. And they were the first creation by George of somebody other than a Jedi or a Sith that could wield the Force and do it on an almost godlike level. So I'd been working on somewhat history of what they are really and where could they have come from and what all that meant back when we did Clone Wars. And then I resurrected it here in Rebels to tie things a bit together and make certain storylines possible.
I discovered these images while going through the Jedi Temple archive on Coruscant.
Still not interested.
I doubt that. Now, these 3 figures appear throughout the Jedi's recorded history.
They're archetypes.
Yes, precisely. They're sometimes referred to as the father, son, and daughter.
In the end, Christian Taylor, who wrote it, had a tremendous task on his hands to try and figure out how do I take all these things that George just explained and that we've outlined together. And how's he going to put a voice to that? And to his credit, he did an amazing job.
Master Qui-Gon, how are you here?
I am here because you are here.
Overlords is probably one of the most incredible things we've been asked to do on this series. Not in way of effects necessarily, in way of animation, visuals, but the story that George laid out for us was something that I think that we'd all, as Star Wars fans, as lovers of mythology, wanted to delve into for a very long time, which was a much more intensive look at the Force.
The thing about Mortis was the notion that the Force can take you places. So the Force basically is deeper and more powerful than anyone can ever imagine. Yes, there's that impressive ability to move things with your minds, to do Jedi mind tricks, to fight with a lightsaber, but that is ultimately a real mortal manifestation of the Force. There's bigger, deeper things out there.
I believe that Star Wars has this grandeur to it. I believe the Force has this infinite space to it. So I started seeding in season 1 this idea of a place where there are stars. When Ezra's in the Jedi Temple and he gets his lightsaber crystal, he is in that world between worlds. He just doesn't know it yet because he's too naive and he's not fully unlocked. The next time he's there with Yoda. And Yoda obviously knows about it because Yoda's talking to him through this as some kind of conveyance where they can both exist in this place. But they probably aren't very far from where they are physically, but it doesn't have anything to do with the physical. It has to do with kind of where they believe they are and where they are mentally. So finally, when he unlocks all the secrets, he can go into this place and have more of an awareness of what's actually going on. And this is when the full world is revealed to him, and then he knows that evil also wants it, because things like that are too good to be true, evil always wants those things to destroy them and to use them for ill purposes. When we deal directly with the Force, Christian Taylor and I feel very strongly that, that word has to come directly from George. A lot of the notes from Mortis come from a really old binder that George has that has his original writings on what the Force is and what makes it up.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance.
Slowly, over time, things will start to become more clear about Mortis. We aren't done exploring the nature of the Force and the kind of bigger mythical questions that we began to ask in the Mortis Trilogy. You will notice on this box that there is no lengthy documentary on the Mortis Trilogy. Christian Taylor, who wrote the trilogy, and myself, we both firmly believe that we should really not answer directly a lot of the questions about Mortis. If I answer directly what something is, I feel that I'll be robbing you of the purpose of that arc, which is to make you wonder. It's to make you challenge certain ideas, to ask questions.
Let's ask questions.
Let's ask questions. Challenge accepted, Filoni. I tweeted about this, which is that before the Clone Wars left Netflix, I watched the Mortis arc like 3 times straight in a row, and I felt like I went crazy. Because it is very, very metaphorical.
Yeah.
It's not saying what it's saying on base. And I remember when these episodes came out, people were like, what kind of garbage plot is this? Like, people didn't like these episodes until they started to change their lens and really think about these things in this particular way. And I think it's important, if it's okay, Ty, I'm gonna give our one caveat to this whole conversation before we get into our thesis, because I think that it's really important to quantify and clarify what we're doing here, which is ultimately, I don't think Ty and I can walk the path for you for what these things mean to you. I think that we can walk through kind of Mortis, Dagobah, what we think it means for the universe based on our own perspectives. The world between worlds. And I think everyone needs to look at these episodes individually and just ask yourselves the questions. We're going to ask some questions ourselves to help you kind of frame things a little bit, but you need to kind of do it for yourself to understand what the answers mean for you.
Yeah, you can't, you ultimately you can't get there unless you kind of get there on your own. Like, it's not all of this is about it's about being an individual and like finding your own path. I mean, that's that's the story at the heart of it, right? And figuring out your true self and figuring out who you are and what is your bliss. Yeah, it's us telling how we've gotten there, but ultimately,
and you've been able to witness some of that if you've listened to our Power of Myth and Symbolism series together. Like, we literally kind of like Dave just talked about, we're kind of understanding ourselves better at the same time as kind of unlocking what we think is going on in the Star Wars universe. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. So the right questions are, is this literal, right? Is this literal?
He asked that.
Yeah, that's kind of the first question.
Implicit knowledge, non-implicit knowledge. What are you talking about, Filoni?
Yeah. We're I think these questions start you down this path. Where is this place? Is it not a physical place? What and then it kind of leads you back to what is the Force and why would it create these places? Is it creating these places? So you can
why do they look the way they look when you're in there, right? Okay, so I'm going to go into what the Force is, or what our understanding of the Force is, in a moment. And this is kind of just a repeat of previous episodes that I've had, especially around the Way of the Force, Seek Joy. Please do go and listen to that episode if you haven't. It's really interesting, and I think that it really does summarize a lot of what especially George and Dave Filoni think about the Force.
Yeah, it's a very George-centric episode. I really like that about it.
Yeah. What we are saying, and our kind of thesis statement for this episode, which I never do for the Way of the Force episodes, but since Ty is here, I felt like it was a good thing to do. The world between worlds, Mortis, a Force time bond, TM, the Dagobah tree, Yoda's lost missions where he goes to the Wellspring, other instances where these kind of odd Force things happen, are all vergences in the Force, in which it's like a point where you can access the collective unconscious of all of the Force, which is made up of all living things. Because we're going to go into it as a character going into it, what we bring with us adapts it to us so that it can communicate with us and shows us what we need, maybe not necessarily what we want. And I would also say that visions are an instance of accessing this collective unconscious. And there's going to be some kind of terminology we're going to try to explain a little bit more, because this all ties to Jungian psychology and how Jung, and thus Campbell, feels about sort of the interconnection between all things.
Yeah. So before we started this episode, we were talking about how the collective unconsciousness and the collective consciousness, when it refers to all beings, is essentially the same thing, right? But when it refers to individuals, it means something very different. So I think that that's it's a good place to start for when we're talking about characters versus you as an individual that's on your own path with what Star Wars means to you versus what Star Wars means for all of us in a meta thought type of way. Having this conversation with people versus having this journey on your own, tapping into the unconscious of yourself versus tapping into the consciousness of all of humanity, or the unconsciousness of all of humanity, which is essentially the same thing, because it just means that it's happening now, and it's also made up of what's come before and what's going to come after, right?
Yes. Also, the collective unconscious is very much like the collective shadow that we talked about in our shadow episode. It is if we could imagine the galaxy as one thing, one person, one entity. It would be the subconscious of that entity.
Right.
It is the thing that rides below that is filled with this symbolic, metaphorical conceptualization to be able to communicate to us as the whole what it needs. They call it the collective unconscious, but that's not the same as the unconscious within an individual. When we refer to collective unconscious, we're referring to almost the subconscious of everything.
And
which is comparison to the person having a subconscious that they tap into with projections, dreams, and how they handle their own shadow.
yeah,
basically.
definitely. And I know it's funny, we actually haven't used the word yet elsewhere, right? But essentially what an elsewhere is that collective unconscious manifesting itself when someone delves into it, right? It manifests itself in different ways depending on the individual. And that's essentially what an elsewhere is in stories. That elsewhere, and we'll talk about we'll break it down, we'll talk about the parallels and some other stories that we love. But, that place is the interaction of that individual with the collective unconscious. It's your unconsciousness, or your delving into like what makes you at the center of you that you haven't figured out. It's that interacting with the collective consciousness or the collective unconsciousness of the world, the good and the bad and everything in between. So
it's like the thing that you are deep down inside, touching what the galaxy is deep down inside. And so that's a lot of framework to give us some words to discuss this stuff. But yes, Ty and I have discussed this, and we're like, we need a new word other than the world between worlds, because actually the world between worlds is kind of a limiting concept. It specifically ties to something Ezra Bridger was experiencing. Yeah. But the concept itself is much larger and grander than just that instance of it. The Force times, the bond between Rey and Kylo, is also an example of this, vergence, this tapping into something grander and larger than yourself. Dagobah, the tree on Dagobah, where Luke, and now we know Kylo is gone, it's that tapping into that. You're asking questions, and it tells you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. And it's very dreamlike. There's a reason these things are dreamlike and speak in metaphors.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of read off kind of the list, as limiting and as silly as it seems, because this concept is so vast and so broad. Like we could talk about plenty of places that are representative of this, but the places that we're going to talk about that actually have intentional meaning, I think, behind them are Mortis, obviously, Dagobah, which you've mentioned, the world between worlds. These are more so vergences of the Force, because I think there's different ways that this manifests depending on what the intention is behind it. If it was created for someone, if someone stumbled upon it, that sort of thing. In Yoda's Lost Missions episodes in the Clone Wars, he goes to a planet which they refer to as the Wellspring of Life, which hosts midichlorians and the Force priestesses, which are essentially one person. We'll talk about that. Force times, just it's really interesting because, when people talk about the world between worlds, initially they think, oh, that's that place that introduced time travel. And no, it's not. It's always been there. It's always been there. If George thought about this place when he was thinking about Mortis, and he was thinking about Force beings, right? Force gods is the way he referred to them. Then that idea that this place existed, that this elsewhere was in the Star Wars universe behind the veil of the living, that's then time and, time travel, that was always going to be a concept. It was inevitable.
Yeah, because so let's talk about the Force.
Tell me about the Force.
Briefly.
Explain the Force to me, Marie Claire.
Oh, what the Force? Okay. Okay, so this has been a journey for me, like by naming the podcast What the Force. I had to like be like, okay, I'm taking this on. So it took me almost like a year and a half to kind of really be like, okay, I think I understand the Force. I asked authors, I asked, experts. I was like, can you explain this to me? Because like it's so weird as a concept. It's like, on base we hear Obi-Wan talking about it's energy between all living things. It binds us, surrounds us, and binds the galaxy together. Well, okay. Yes. Yoda talks about it, and he says, the rock, the tree, the ship, only difference in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. What they are saying, and, again, go back to that episode, Seek Joy, is that there is a connection between all living things. Everything is actually whole and one. We are all part of the Force. Chirrut has a really good chant, and he says, I'm with the Force and the Force is with me. But what is actually being said is that everything is the same. You are not only yourself, but you are also the rock, the tree, the ship. There's a really great quote, and I was actually going to read it out loud from the Revenge of the Sith novelization, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is connecting with the Force, and it's actually described how he feels in that moment. So let me just do a little dramatic reading. He doesn't even need to reach into the Force. He has already let the Force reach into him. The Force flows over him and around him as though he has stepped into a crystal pure waterfall lost in the green coils of a forgotten rainforest. When he opens himself into that sparkling stream, it flows into him and through him and out again without the slightest interference from his conscious will. The part of him that calls himself Obi-Wan Kenobi is no more than a ripple, an eddy in the pool in which he endlessly pours. There are parts of him here as well. There is nothing that is not part of him. From the scuff mark on R2-D2's dome to the tattered hem of Palpatine's robe, from the spindling cracks in one of the transparacile panels of the curving view wall above to the greatest ships that still battle beyond it, because this is all part of the Force.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Whoa. Hold a second. What?
There are a few things here, right? Because, like, it reminds me a lot of in another Star Wars, right? It reminds me of the We Are All Luke Skywalker stuff, right? Because even though that's a different type of concept, we're talking about like the Force. We're talking about the Force being everything is connected. All of these little things, all these little details, they're all connected by the Force. But then there's also, we are all the same because of the Force, or we are all made up of similar things because of the Force. The Force runs through all of us. We are all Luke Skywalker. We all have the potential to be a hero, right? These all connect. It's a thematic connection.
Yeah. And it's repeated in different ways for you to kind of try to wrap your heads around, right? Because this is a very hard thing. And there's a really great a video all about the concept of the egg, which is that, in it, there's a character that you see, and you are that character, and it's telling you the story about how you died and how you are going to be reborn into the world, and that you are not only the person that you just were and the person that you are becoming, but you are literally every person that has ever lived and will ever live. There is no difference. The difference is only in your mind. And the reason that you're going through that is to learn how to understand and have compassion for the different aspects of the whole, also, which are yourself.
This is like a weird aside parallel, but there's like this idea in spiritual Judaism, like Kabbalah, a certain sect of it has this idea, and this was described to me in this way by a Jewish professor of mine, where I was taking a class on the Jewish diaspora, and he described kind of this way of thinking as he actually brought like a piece of pottery into the class and he broke it. And he said, this is God. And he broke the piece of pottery. He was quite eclectic as a professor. And he broke it and he gave out pieces of it to each individual in the class. And he said, okay, so every single one of you has a piece of God. And when you die, you break that piece, and the bits of that piece will go to all the people that you influenced ever in your life, all the people you ever touched, right? And it'll go to your children, and, if you have children, that kind of thing. And so whenever I kind of think about these ideas about the Force and some of the other parallels that we'll talk about later, I always go back to this idea that, God, if you think about it in this way, no matter if you believe in God or whatever, but, if you think about these concepts in this way, then this is the Force. Like, the Force is like all that exists everywhere, and it exists in all of us. And what is all that is, what is God, is real, but it exists through every individual being. Weird aside, mystical Judaic lesson there, but I think it's a good way to talk about it. Yeah.
Oh, and it ties to kind of like the Greek concept of the cosmic world egg, that everything started out as an egg, and from that egg, everything exists.
So we all are connected because of that, since we all came from the same place and the same thing, not physically, but spiritually, our souls are all connected. Mm-hmm. It's weird.
But also, I mean, like, also physically, too, because of technically the Big Bang. We're all from the same place, from the same source. So even though we consider ourselves different, the difference only exists in our minds.
Yeah. There are so many places in religious thought all over the world this comes from. And this is all so Campbellian, like it's all related for a reason. Like, we all have similar thoughts for a reason. Like, we all, I see funny posts on Twitter that are like, why does everybody have the same childhood as I do? And it'll reference like a funny tweet about, when you were younger and you were scared of something it's totally ridiculous, but everybody relates to that. Everybody had the same experience, and they're like,
and it's because we are made of the same stuff. I also really love the overview effect, because it helps you conceptualize how everything that will ever be or has ever been on Earth is just on this weird blue marble. And we have to take care of each other in this weird blue marble. Isaac Asimov said that, when looking at the pictures of Earth from Voyager, looking back and saying, this is the extent of human history all in one picture.
Yeah.
And like, so, okay. So what is elsewhere? Okay, so we've established, and I know your brain is probably hurting because my brain literally starts to hurt as soon as I start to think about this. So I apologize in advance. Please pop an aspirin or an Advil or a Tylenol.
Or drink a beer.
Drink a beer. Just be like chilling out, because it is a hard concept, and you're probably going to need to take this one home with you and think about it, but just kind of skip to the place where, okay, everything is the same.
It's weird to say it, but words are limiting, right? Like, words don't do it justice.
Yeah. Joseph Campbell warns us about that a lot. Like, you have to conceptualize it in your own mind. You have to do the journey. The egg, like, little story and animation really helped cement a lot of things for me personally. Thank you, David Brady, for sending that my way. Because although I had thought about these things, it really is a lovely way to actually put it. So I'll link it in the liner notes for this episode. Okay. At that Rebels panel that we actually started the super clip from Dave at, he talked about how part of the World Between Worlds came from the concept from the Narnia series of a wood between the worlds. And in that, you have these magical rings that allow you to access this kind of nexus point between the different realms that exist within the Narnia reality, which there is actually 3 of. There's 3 realities, which is three times.
Yes, there were 3. And actually, later on in the story, we learned that there are 11 pools total. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So 3 was significant in many aspects because you also needed 2 so there are 2 rings, but they both did different things, right?
Yeah, one let you in and one let you out.
But then you also needed the pools.
Yeah.
So that was the 3 as well there. So there were a lot of iterations of 3, yeah.
Of this concept of how you could get into this location or travel between these different worlds. So what it is saying is that the difference is only illusion.
Yeah.
Like that's what it's saying, and the wood is very much alive because it is actually part of the fabric of these realities, basically. And the wood has protections of its own, so it only lets people in and through that kind of are on a journey of self-discovery.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because when the who would become the witch was let in, she ended up like becoming very, I think, like lethargic, and like there was like kind of this toxin that was affecting her in a certain way because it was the wood protecting itself from her, from what she wanted out of it, because she was a selfish person. Yeah,
interesting. That's a good parallel. That's a really good parallel to what happens in the World Between Worlds episodes.
Palpatine,
I think that's just really important to say, like, okay, so that's one of the concepts.
It's important, right? Because they actually said World Between Worlds, and it's literally called the Wood Between Worlds.
He said that.
Like, of course it's drawing off of that, and they told us it was drawn off of that, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Like Dave actually said that at the Rebels Remembered panel.
We talked about
as well as I did want to bring up Josh Johnson, who was again on our Minotaur and the Maze episode and the Labyrinth. He actually sent me this amazing Campbellinian quote, which actually ties to the world egg and how everything is all kind of together. And it comes from creative mythology in how the ancients sort of viewed everything as the same. Even though you had individualism in it, everything came from the same source. And essentially, the mother goddess is the chalice, so the thing that contains everything. And standing in this bowl of the winged serpent, we are inside that sacred chalice, drinking in with our eyes, so to say, the intoxicant, they're symbolized as wine of the mysteries of the substance of our beings. So when we are in these like vergent states in elsewhere, we are consuming the straight up truth of the universe as it relates to us.
Yeah, there's a lot of like really weird like feminine things there, right? Because the idea of like drinking from a chalice, which is shaped like a woman's reproductive system. And in Maureen Murdoch in A Heroine's Journey, she talks a lot about, like, there's a couple of stories that have to do with a chalice that she talks about that women had brought to her in therapy. And one of the more interesting stories that I gravitated towards was a woman who was trying to break herself off from her daughter who was leaving to go to college, and she was trying to break herself off from her religion, and she ended up imagining or having a dream about drinking blood from a big golden chalice in a church, right? So this is like the sacred union stuff, like with God and with Jesus and whatnot, sacrament. But it was also for her, what it meant at the time was reconnecting with her spiritual feminine, and almost as like a sacrificial type thing. Like she was doing something that was kind of like, it was like a literal interpretation of the sacrament in a way, but it wasn't Jesus's blood in her dream. It was her blood. Yeah. So she was kind of doing this like religious ceremony for herself, like drinking in herself. which is fascinating.
But like that's what
this is. Yeah,
yes, that's what it is. It's a spiritual experience for our characters, drinking in themselves and a bit.
Yes, and a bit of the universe. Absolutely.
A bit of the universe. And I think that's going to be really, really important today to say when we talk about some of the examples.
And I know we also wanted to kind of define like iterative storytelling. And this is something that keeps coming up in all of our conversations, and it's really important.
So the ring theory episode came out, and just as a quick aside, ring theory covers that everything is repetitive storytelling in Star Wars, and it could be little rings where it shows the story again kind of in a microcosm, or it's larger rings which tells the whole story like the whole saga, or the little rings within it that tell the individual episodes within the saga or the trilogies themselves. And they're rings within rings within rings within rings because they repeat to tell us the story again. But on top of that, there is a level of iteration that happens as people, the creators, discover new ways and new stories to tell that also reflect the whole in different ways.
And the whole point of doing this over and over again is you're drawing upon certain themes from the initial story. Every single time you add a layer, you create layers for the theme, and you actually bring more meaning to the original theme. That's why like things like The Force Awakens, even though it had a very similar thematic like arc to it and had very similar plot points, right, as the original film, it was drawing upon those themes because of the iterative nature of Star Wars. It was actually making those original themes more important to the story. It was saying, hey, look, this is important. This is...
And from a unique angle.
Yeah.
Because like tying to the concept, and I talk about this again in the Ken Liu episode, like getting to the truth of what Star Wars is trying to say to us. They have to tell us the same story from as many different angles as they possibly can. And that's to tell us the thematic elements that they're trying to get across, which is the one story, the truth about
from
humanity.
A certain point of view, right?
From a certain point of view.
That's really important.
All right. I want to use a quote, and you're going to hear this quote probably come up a lot in my conversations because it's like my absolute favorite quote now. So if I bring it up again and again, I apologize. It's perfect. So I recently picked up a copy of Star Wars, The Magic of Myth, which was a book that came out in supplement to the Smithsonian exhibit that happened in 1997.
Crazy.
And this book was written by Mary Henderson. And for the most part, with regards to the original trilogy, it captures all of what Star Wars is from a meta perspective. It is brilliant. It doesn't include some of the stuff from the prequels, but later on there was an exhibit that added in some of the prequels' essential information, and it has iterated since then a little bit with Clone Wars, with the additional Rebels, with the sequel trilogy itself, and now with new shows that are starting. So when we talk about what kind of the core concepts are, it outlined everything to do with the hero's journey and showed these concepts in relation to myth.
The book itself, I actually ordered a copy for myself. It was the last one that was sold by the bookseller that I found. But Marie Claire showed it to me and I was like, oh my Lord. It actually brings up all of the myths that we've ever talked about on this show, and in general in our other conversations, like in our conversations on Twitter and everything like that. It brought up like the Minotaur myth in the maze, which I was like, what? Like, so this woman, Mary Henderson, was seeing these themes back in the 90s, and she was writing about them. And when we talk about meta thought, this is all of the meta thought, all of the metas we've ever written. They're all in this book. And it's done in such a way that's like, yeah, this is how it is. This is what it is. Like, of course it is. No doubt.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it's myth. Of course it's hero's journey. Of course it's psychology.
So yeah, have a little bit more confidence about your meta threads and just general meta thought, because like, you're right. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. And this was published, in part with Lucasfilm of the time. This was before the extended editions came out. This came out, and it was very free spoken about what things mean. When Joseph Campbell maintained that all mythic stories draw upon a common store of images and symbols, he was in part referring to the work of psychiatrist Carl Jung and his theories of archetypes. He believed that certain psychological urges and instincts manifest themselves in fantasies and reveal their presence through symbolic motif. These forms or images occur practically all over the work as contents of myth. As forms rise out of the unconscious mind in dreams and myths, archetypes appear as characters, princesses, knights, dragons, wizards, and fools who help or hinder the hero on the path to enlightenment. Or they may appear as archetypical images. As we watch the conflict unfold, we find the germ of meaning that can help us make sense of our own lives. So germ as in a germination, the seed of truth to help us make sense of our own lives. This is what the Force has been saying this whole time. And I didn't know it already existed in a book from 20 years ago.
So crazy.
So I mean,
she literally lists out princesses, knights, dragons, wizards, fools. Like, oh my god, like somebody was already thinking about this.
Yes,
like, this is a thing, and I knew it was a thing on the surface, right? You know, it's a thing on the surface.
Yeah.
But for her to say that these archetypes are important because they relate back to like Jungian thought, and think about the way Campbell was thinking about it, like really delving into it below the surface, like that to me, like that's so special. Like that's what we're all doing, I tell people, just let your mind go there, right?
Yeah, it's why we pull out our tinfoil tiaras, because it gives us permission to allow our brains to go there. Because in some ways we have been so restricted by how we feel like we should act with regards to analysis of these things.
Am I reading too far into it?
Yeah.
No, you're never reading too far into it. You can go too far sometimes to literally drive yourself insane. That's too far. That's too much. Don't do that.
But think about these things in deep ways, right? Think about them in ways that gives you meaning, because then you're on the right track because you're plugging into what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so Star Wars does this just on surface with the storytelling, right? Princesses, Jedi Knights, fools. DJ, I can think of
DJ.
specifically.
Yeah.
No, Star Wars does this just with the story, right? So that's important to acknowledge. But it also does this with its direct metaphorical story that it tells when the characters delve into the subconscious. They go directly to the source. They go and have a conversation with the goddess, the inner goddess. Okay. There's a really interesting quote, and it really helps you frame kind of how dangerous the journey is that in the World Between Worlds episode, there's this interesting meta commentary between Sabine and the minister who is assigned to figure out how to get into the World Between Worlds and kind of control its power by the Emperor. And he has absolute faith that his Emperor will succeed. And Sabine has absolute faith that Ezra will succeed. It's really, really interesting, this little play that's outside of the very interesting conceptual understanding of this idea that is in the World Between Worlds. So we're going to get to that in a bit. But the stuff that happens outside, they literally tell you, and you heard in that supercut, it's archetypes.
Yeah.
Everything has meaning.
Yeah.
But the minister, in a different kind of clip, says, your friend is not safe beyond the veil.
Yeah.
Okay. So the veil itself is in reference to, in the temple in Jerusalem, people that the veil was a sort of figurative location where the innermost sanctum was. And if you were to go beyond that, you were in a way speaking to God. You were in this mysterious division between life and the other, the elsewhere. So this exists in our world itself from a spiritual sense, from a religious sense, this location. So if you go beyond the veil, you're not going to be safe. You're not going to leave it unchanged. That's the point. It's also referring to you're no longer kind of in the realm of the living.
Yeah.
When you're there.
Yeah, there's this idea in like, you know, religious thought and like religious stories, you know, like Muhammad meditated in a cave, right? And that's, you know, how he gained a lot of his ideas, but then he also ascended on a mountain, you know, and the same thing happens in like Christian and Judaic ideas, and even like, you know, going to like the Buddha and like Hinduism and whatnot. There's an idea about descending, and then there's an idea about ascending, and you have to do both, right? In order to figure out, in order to reach enlightenment.
And when you go and speak to the source, you may not come back.
Yeah.
Like that's an important thing, because you might get lost in there.
And that's what a lot of people do in real life, right? They get lost in the delving into everything. Yeah.
And that symbolically actually plays out in Harry Potter when Sirius Black falls beyond the veil of the gateway.
Yeah.
Right?
And
it was a sacrifice. It was a sacrificial thing to, you know, in that moment.
That's true.
But that's what it's referring to, this similar concepts that, you know, if you're trying to explore these larger concepts of what this all means, you might get lost.
Yeah. Going into it and coming out of it is a part of the cycle of life, and
ties directly to the Campbellian journey. In when you go into the underworld, you are going into the subconscious. So that's why when we have these sort of mini arcs of these characters going to these elsewhere locations, they're actually going into the underworld or into the subconscious, or speaking to the goddess in Ray's journey, right? It is the conversation with yourself and the universe.
Murdoch says you have to be mindful of it in order to come out of it. So if you are unable to process the fact that you're undergoing that sort of journey, then you will get lost and you will stay lost. The same thing happens if you are unable to process your anger, if you're unable to realize that you're angry and why you're angry. If you can't come back from that anger, you will not be able to come out of that, the dark area. But, you know, it's interesting. So we talk... Okay, so I'm going to transition to like talking about kind of Campbell and Jung's ideas, and about how we can have like this meta thought without accepting that they're 100% correct, right? So Marie Claire and I were having a conversation about this. We can the thing about Campbell is that he has tapped into these ideas about myth and about these stories, and they come from his ideas about his ideas about like Jungian thought. And you know, you can acknowledge that the ritual exists, right? The ritual exists and it means something, but it's not 100% truth. And you can also acknowledge the reality in the same instance, and that's okay. Like, it's okay that you can say, like, Campbell's not 100% right, Jung's not 100% right, but hey, like, this ritual and this story is very Campbellian, it's very Jungian, and you can do that. There's symbolism, and then there's the real world, and our symbolism does not always tell us the full truth, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just through a a lens that colors it in a specific way.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to acknowledge that the color exists. And I often view these locations, and I try to view them from like 3 or 4 different angles. Yeah. When we experience them. So what is happening from a base storytelling perspective? And then what is happening in a metaphorical way? What is happening if you view this from the whole perspective of the saga itself and the larger story? And what is happening almost on an internal, if you go inside of the characters, what is happening from a change perspective in their own subconscious? And that helps you kind of grasp what is being told in this very metaphorical way.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring out some quotes from Campbell here because I get going back to like this idea of time. Like this elsewhere exists on a plane that is not it is not beholden to time or space, right? It makes things like time travel like a possible, plot device, but that doesn't matter. That's not the point. That wasn't why. That's not why it exists. And one of the interesting things that Campbell brought up in Power of Myth was about the masks of God, right? So we're talking about like Jungian ideas, Jungian archetypes. Campbell brings up this idea of the sword, and earlier with Filoni's description of the Sword of Mortis, it made me think about this again because this is such a great way to kind of process Campbellian thought, is to think about the flaming sword, dagger of Mortis. It's totally metaphorical. It's just a metaphor, right? That's how he says it. But in like another clip that I listened to that you sent to me said that, we gave it some shadowy effect to make it more spiritual.
Yeah.
Because
it was almost made out of
it was made out of like shadow and smoke.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah.
It's not physical. It's a spiritual dagger. So Campbell and Moyers in The Power of Myth are having this conversation about the idea that this sword, this flaming sword, always appears in so many religious contexts, right? It's always like an angel or a hero of some sort is holding a flaming sword over their head. And a lot of religious art happens in Hinduism as well. And they say, what is the sword? What is it? And then Campbell says, it's to distinguish the merely temporal time from the eternal, right? It's the sword that distinguishes that which is enduring from that which is merely passing. The tick, tick, tick of time shuts out eternity, and we live in the field of time. But what is living in the field of time is an eternal principle that's inflected this way. So this is Campbell thinking cyclically again, right? He's saying that the sword is a symbol of the eternal. But what is eternal is time. Time is eternal. What is eternal, what is truth, what is real is that we only have this time. We only have our lives. But the important thing, and the thing to always come back to in your mind, is that there is an eternal. There is something that's going to be. There is something that always is. So then he says the internal principle is God. But then he says, but that's limiting. You can actually have eternity right now. And think upon that the way you will, because his next words are, well, words are always qualifications and limitations. Because what he's trying to tell the viewer is that it's not God, it's not eternity, it's not temporal. Like what all these words are so limiting to what I'm trying to explain. It's that these stories and these myths and these symbols are showing us that your time on earth is precious. And you need to remember that it's going to contribute to the eternal. It's going to contribute to the time after your death, after you're not here anymore.
That you actually do have a effect on the whole.
The flaming sword is that. The flaming sword is the effect of your time here and the time after you. And that's what the dagger of Mortis is, essentially. And it's wrapped up in this weird symbolic nature of what is Mortis and what is Anakin's fate, what is his destiny, who is he going to become,
And the dagger is a metaphor also for the legacy lightsaber. It is a metaphor for the ongoing journey, and that's why Rey holding the flaming sword is important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this goes back to that other Campbell quote about, all we can do is, all we can do is just learn what to do with the time that we have now. And it's not about morality play, right? It's not about good versus evil. It's not about good versus evil. It's about what you choose to do with what has been given to you by the past and what to do to fulfill a certain future for mankind and whatnot. So that's such a weird, it's such a weird way of talking about it.
So Campbell often gives me headaches.
Campbell and I'll say this to my dying day, he thinks cyclically. And Marie Claire does it sometimes, and I do it sometimes. And like literally when you do it and you say it to somebody, like with Bill Moyers, he's so fascinating because he summarizes everything that Campbell says. That's why The Power of Myth as a show is like absolutely brilliant. Yes.
So powerful.
Because Campbell says something, Bill Moyers responds, and Campbell says, yes, but it continues.
Yeah. It's like it's an ongoing cyclical conversation where he does a little loop. Bill gets him moving forward. He does a little loop. Bill Moyers gets him more forward. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. Like it makes it easier to understand, honestly. It makes it easier to understand as opposed to reading Campbell, which is a totally different journey altogether. But anyways, yeah, I digress. I think we could talk about some of the parallels in case you want to.
Well, I do want to say that every time people enter into these vergences, that things are happening on multiple levels, and that's going to be hard for me to wrap my head around. So I think that it's probably hard for everybody to kind of wrap their head around that it's happening to the character. The character is experiencing the exact plot points that are happening. They are also experiencing the dreamlike quality of the subconscious of the universe. The subconscious of the universe, this collective unconscious is dreaming with them. And they're also experiencing, potentially, in ring theory, a version of the truth of the one story. And they are also experiencing change internally on a character subconscious perspective. So that is 4 ways the characters are always experiencing everything in Star Wars, but in particular in these vergences elsewhere.
It puts another layer on what's happening.
I find that it helps to like get myself into that perspective and watch it in that angle. Like be like, okay, what is happening internally for this character? And only watch it like that. What is happening if you kind of squint and think about it in regards to the whole saga? You know, like, or put on that tinfoil tiara and be like, what is this saying? Because just like how we heard Dave Filoni say, in Mortis, it is telling you the story of the saga again. I mean, that is both plugging into the subconscious of the galaxy through Anakin's lens, and we'll get into that. It's plugging in through Anakin's lens. That is the most important person in Mortis.
Yeah, central
to that to that arc. Everything that happens is because they are there. You know, it's from his perspective of the galaxy, right? It's like a fisheye lens. Like you can only see kind of your own view through this, you know, conduit of the Force.
Yeah. Ooh, it's getting weird. I love that it's getting weird.
Yeah,
I love that it's getting weird. This is my favorite part about Star Wars is the weirdness. The weirdness.
But the weirdness is also just, you know, like a dream.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's that harkens back to like what ritual, and that harkens back to myth and what we experience together and how we experience it together. Yeah.
And how we share a story and what that story is meant to do, which is tell you you're not alone.
Ooh. Okay. So we're harping on it a lot with this, but like let's talk about like parallels, because it's really fascinating to me. If anybody is like Dark Crystal fan, you know, if you saw like my last video that I put out that was about Star Wars Dark Crystal parallels, we're kind of touching upon that idea, like dreaming, like dream fasting, you know, that's a thing in the Dark Crystal universe. And there's a few others that I wanted to touch upon. So we talked about the wood between worlds. We talked about how they have pools and they have these rings, and that's how they can get to different places. And the wood protects itself from evil.
It's like how the wolves protect the temple in Lothal and the gateway into the world between worlds. There is a protection aspect to that journey.
Yeah.
There's a guardian, there's a Cerberus, there's a gate.
Yeah, there's a Cerberus. Yeah, and it's
interesting.
It's natural in its manifestation. It's very natural. So there's a few others. There's in the Cosmere of Brandon Sanderson. If anyone's familiar with this series, it's the Cosmere is the world in which many of Sanderson's series take part in. And the Cosmere is made up of many planets. And on these different planets, different stories of his, happen. And on Roshar, which is like his kind of more epic series, there's a cognitive realm. He calls them cognitive realms. It's called Shadesmar. And obviously it's Shadow Realm, Shade, Shadesmar. Like that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the more well thought out Shadow Realm, I would think. He calls them cognitive realms. And we know this because his characters and his stories are figuring out that this realm exists, like through the stories. Yeah. So they're experiencing it in different ways and on different planets.
Like Ezra figuring out that where he is meeting Yoda is him getting closer to the world between worlds that he eventually gets to in season 4.
Exactly. We have in the Cosmere, we have people called world hoppers that have figured out how to use the cognitive realm to travel to different worlds, because they found out that because it's a cognitive realm, you can travel between planets without having to go across many light years, right? Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's a big connection right there.
It's a big connection. And then not only that, but one of the essential ways to travel is to find these places called pools or wells, right? This is water. All goes back to water, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with some of our other parallels. But water is pretty essential, just like the pools in the Wood Between Worlds. These wells contain such a concentration of some sort of power, whatever power, that was handed to that world in the form of what they call like a shard, which is a piece of what existed to be God. So it all goes back to like Kabbalah. Anyways, anyone that knows the series will know what I'm talking about, but it's really interesting. You should check it out. But the wells, that's how you can enter the cognitive realm. And you become kind of like a shadow. And it manifests differently depending on the planet that you're on and depending on the power that the magical system that planet has. So that's really interesting. One of the other things I wanted to point out about it was that there are 3 realms, essentially, in Sanderson's Cosmere. There's the physical realm, there's the cognitive realm, and then there's the spiritual realm. And Sanderson will not explore the spiritual realm because he is actually a Christian, and he believes that should be saved for the individual to kind of explore for themselves. He thinks that realm doesn't need to be talked about. And that actually kind of mirrors, it mirrors everything, to be honest. But, Aslan in the Wood Between Worlds, so Aslan actually has a world in Narnia that Narnia exists in like rings, and his outer ring, like the outer rim planets, right? Whatever. Aslan has like his world that exists on the outer skirts of the dome of Narnia that he doesn't allow people to go to until they die. So so this place is described
becoming one with the Force.
Yeah, becoming one with the Force. Yeah,
right. You become one with the Force,
and he doesn't talk about it a lot. Like it's talked about a little bit in the books, but like otherwise it's kind of left for the individual to contemplate. It's the spiritual realm. It exists outside of the cognitive and the physical. It's spiritual. So then another thing I wanted
that's so cool.
So another one I want to talk about kind of Atlantis a little bit, because the idea of Atlantis is an idea, right? It's purely.
I didn't even really think about this one. This is so interesting.
So I'm glad. I'm trying to summarize as much as I can. The rings in the Narnia series come from dust that not originated with Atlantis, but was found apparently in Atlantis in the story, right? And then was created into the rings.
And these are like physical rings that people wear that allow them to travel between the worlds. Yeah, sorry. I just want to clarify that. It's not like the rings in the World Between Worlds episode where they can travel to different locations.
But that's basically,
thematically they're the
idea.
same.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Metaphorically, they're the same, right? Rings are holy because they have no beginning and end, and they're basically like a way to say that everything is interconnected and that it is eternity. Rings are eternity, right? They're forever. So like that's the important element of that parallel.
Breaking the boundaries of time. And that's the same thing that exists with pools, the idea of pools. Yeah.
We're elsewhere.
Yeah. So the idea of Atlantis itself and the fascinating thing about it being used to explain this way of traveling to different worlds is that Atlantis itself has always been, this place that has existed in the minds of humans in a myth, but it doesn't actually exist. And we all know it doesn't exist. And as many history, show documentaries want to talk it up as if it existed, as if it sunk into the bottom of the ocean one day, it doesn't exist because the entire idea of Atlantis, and I when I was in high school, I bought the Atlantis dialogue by Plato, which was like all of the words that were ever said about Atlantis that came from his mouth. And it's like this tiny. It's like really tiny. It's like 30 pages. And it's basically his idea of utopia, right? The physical nature of Atlantis was rings. It was like certain people lived here, and then the next ring was like agriculture, and the next ring was this, and the next ring was that. And it was different rings had different purposes, and it was supposed to be like this perfect utopia that Plato conjured up in his mind. So,
and that very much ties to journeys into the underworld, into unconscious. It's all ring-like. We do this naturally with our brains because our brains are structured in a specific way to see this archetypical image in our story. So rings
and
happen. Like Dante's Inferno, the rings of hell.
Exactly, the rings of hell. And that's exactly. One of the other things. Like it's all getting into like diving into our subconscious. And the idea of Atlantis is so funny to me because it is Dante's Inferno in a way. It's just like the opposite of the idea of like why it was made up. Let's delve into hell. Let's delve into heaven. What is utopia? What is our punishment? Like that's the idea is.
But in some ways it's a reflection of not only the person, but also the society of the time. What needed to be said. Dante lived at a specific time. Plato lived at a specific time. And what were they trying to say? So you also have to kind of view it in the context by which it happened. And that's what we're going to do with Star Wars.
Exactly. So, and that brings me to my last parallel, which the Dark Crystal existed in a time, right, in its conception at the same time that Star Wars did. So, we have dream fasting. We have this idea that we can connect beyond the real world, and we can connect our minds and experience what somebody else experienced, which is something that Spock can do. It's something that
which is weirdly spiritual, like the Vulcans for being so purely rational have like this very odd spiritual under element, especially like when they go into kind of like their they're like when they're overcome with emotions because it's their time to meet and stuff like that. Like they end up like having this very interesting dichotomy, even though and like mind melding. It's like all of these remnants of the past that keep on coming up to them because they've forgotten about them.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating because it is like, to me, I think about like the Vulcans being like incredibly intelligent. Therefore, they're able to tap into whatever the cognitive realm of Star Trek, whatever that would be. But that's, that's very similar to like the dream fasting, but the source is different, right? The source is different, but because on Thra, it's that these people are connected to the planet. They're all made from the planet. The planet itself, Thra created its creatures. It's just like God breaking into millions of different pieces. But in this case, it literally grew them from the earth. So, like, it's all the same story. It's all the same story. It's all the same story. Yeah.
It's all one story, so, Kathleen Kennedy.
I wanted to talk about, like, the third. And, like, and to bring this up.
Third way?
And then we can kind of go into Mortis after this.
This
has been driving us insane for weeks.
Yeah. Should we pose the question?
Please pose the question.
All right. So, okay. We're talking about Elsewhere. And I just like, I messaged, I can't stop giggling. I messaged Ty and I'm like, you know how in the Dark Crystal, 3s are important. Why is it only 2s or binary in Star Wars?
In Star Wars, it's all about duality. And then
it's all about duality and finding
the balance.
The balance of the two.
But in every other story where all of these ideas exist, like the idea of balance and the idea of light versus dark and female versus, or feminine versus masculine, all these ideas that we see, there's not duality and then you find yourself in the middle. There is a third path. It's all about triangles. It's all about combining 3 things and the third way. And it's really interesting because the third way is not the answer. The path between the 3, that is the answer.
Yes. The way between worlds. the elsewhere. The journey into the subconscious.
That's the path.
Is the path.
It's not the answer, but the answer is the journey, right?
The answer is the journey. Yes, this is the thing that like is very hard to like wrap your head around. It's like, what is the truth? What is truth? Well, actually, the truth is the try.
I like that. The truth is the try. Yeah, no, that's the closest I think that we can get to. Here I am. I'm 28-year-old. I don't know what I am. I'm a 28-year-old married woman.
I don't know, like the best person that I've met.
Oh, you're sweet. Yeah. And you're the best person I've met. And you're 30 what? And have children and
37. Have kids. Trying to figure out Star Wars as an ongoing puzzle in my own brain. Yeah, no. So the journey is the truth.
I think that that's what the stories are trying to tell us, because I think that's it doesn't matter if that's the truth for life, because we're all on this journey. We're all experiencing it. This is where we are right now, right? Me and you figuring this out.
Well, you have no choice but to accept the journey. Because the journey is what it is. You have the journey until you die. So the journey is the truth.
I mean, I think so.
and that's what Elsewhere represents, is a microcosm of these journeys. It's a mini ring within all of the rings, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I have some more Campbell quotes that talk about this. I'm sorry.
Good.
I'm sorry.
No. It's good. It's good because it helps us. Because honestly, like, you need more and more words to start to wrap your head around all of this stuff. Because we haven't even gotten into what actually happens in these microcosm situations. Because there is so much to kind of digest, to think about the fact that we are one and the same. Just as a quick summary, we are all the Force. The Force is everything. We are individuals, but we are also the whole.
And you can be both at the same time. And it doesn't take away anything from you as an individual to be a part of the whole.
Yes. And tapping into these elsewheres, these locations, is not only diving into yourself as an individual, but also diving into the whole to understand what is going on in the inner workings of ourselves. And it's all going to be metaphorical because it is all of the subconscious and dreams.
So, okay. So Campbell, and I'm going to read these quotes as in the Campbell tone as I possibly can, because this actually happens in Power of Myth. But I want to read these. So Campbell says, dude, laughing at me. Stop it. So
I'm listening.
So Campbell says, whenever one moves out of the transcendent, one comes into a field of opposites. These two pairs of opposites come forth as male and female from the two sides. What has eaten of the tree of knowledge, not only of good and evil, but of male and female, of right and wrong, of this and that, light and dark, everything in the field of time, everything that's temporal, is dual, past and future, dead and alive. All this, being and non-being, isn't. The masks of eternity, he's talking about the masks of God, right? Which equals the masks of eternity, because God is eternity. The mask represents the middle. The two represent the two opposites on either side of the mask. And they always come in pairs. And put your mind in the middle. Most of us put our minds on the side of the good against what we think of as evil, right? And then he goes on to explain that God sees all as good. So
Good.
everything
is good. God is good. Everything is God, and
Eternal.
everything is good.
He's talking about 3, but he's talking about 2 because he's saying that all that we can see and all we can interpret is 2. He's asking us to find our third path. He's asking us to find our third way. It's very much individualistic.
And it's just like climbing the mountain for Muhammad. It's the journey that is finding the third way. That is the resolution of the gray. I didn't mean to rhyme.
But it did.
But it did. Sorry. But no, that's what's being said, is that these locations, these insights, are us having our mini journey into the path of enlightenment, into understanding the third way. I think it's a good time to bring up that quote, actually.
Oh, the elsewhere quote?
So
the Rumi quote?
Yeah. Here's the Rumi quote. And again, Rumi is somebody who is also talking about this third way. So put it in your mind. And incidentally, Vic Mahoney happened to have it on her
so
mood
it's
wall.
important.
Why? Yeah. I mean, not that these things are important, but no, it's actually very important. So the Rumi poem is: out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. So I read the rest of it in there.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
What does it mean? It means that through these journeys into elsewhere, we have an opportunity to truly understand ourselves.
And to understand each other. Yeah, because I will meet you there. Meaning that we can come together and we can resolve
the question of right and wrongdoing.
Yeah.
It is the force. It is going into the force, becoming part of the force. It is everything. You are becoming part of the mask of God, at least momentarily. Yeah. And if you can spend some time there, lay down in the grass, have a rest, the world is too full to talk about.
Yeah, and I should have probably said that the mask of God, the reason why it's considered to be a mask is because and we talked about this a little bit in our episode where we talked about what a mask means in Star Wars, because it's hiding the truth. It's putting on a persona, but under the surface of that, Campbell calls them the masks of God because he's saying that it's all the same God. The mask that it puts on is just a personification. It's what we're putting on it.
It's the personification of the eternal, the source.
And we don't know.
Force,
and whatever that is, like, we maybe have not figured it out exactly, but it's like we put on it all that we know and all that we understand because that's all that we have. So that's us. We put the mask on God, whatever that is.
We make it fulfill whatever cultural and personal thing we need it to fill.
So that's what that means in this context of talking about from a Campbellian perspective. Again, take what you will from it because it is very
dense.
Yeah. It's very
heavy.
Yeah, definitely. It is very heavy. Yeah. Who knew that we would be sitting here having a conversation about Star Wars and getting into like, what is God? God is the eternal. Like, is it the eternal? What does that mean? What does religion mean? No.
What does this mean for me? Huh. But I mean, I think it's important that when we talk about elsewhere, we talk about what it means for the character that's entering it.
And that's what we're going to get into now, right? Whoa.
Yeah. So this frame is really interesting because Mortis and in the World Between Worlds and in Dagobah, in all of these locations, which they draw parallels to when they talk about these things. So they say, oh, Mortis is just like 3 episodes in the tree in Dagobah. Oh, really? Okay. Let's view it like how Yoda talks about the tree in Dagobah. You know, what is in there, Yoda? Luke says to him, and he says, only what you take with you. Right? And then when Obi-Wan is speaking with Qui-Gon, who appears to him in Mortis, he's like, why are you here? And Qui-Gon says, I am here because you are here.
Yeah, that was the big giveaway for me, honestly.
Yes. Yeah, it helped me put some puzzle pieces into place because, you know, they're saying you get what you bring into this conversation.
Meaning, then, you know, what are the Mortis Gods?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So again, this is just us and our interpretation. The warning has been made. What are the Mortis Gods, Ty, in your opinion?
Okay, so
you can start.
We were jiving a bit on Messenger the other day talking about it, but honestly, like, I think that it's pretty obvious when Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka step foot. And literally they go through what looks to be like a Sith holocron type of thing. It's red, you know, it's like it's a diamond type shape.
It's like a combination between you know, because it's like a diamond.
Yeah, it's a diamond.
It's bigger than a Sith holocron. It's half and half. Like it's like 2 Sith holocrons together in some ways. But they go into the middle, into the
middle. Yeah.
So they're going beyond the veil. So this is all, and it exists out of time and space already because Rex is trying to contact them and they can't seem to contact him. So they go in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so the way that these Force beings manifest themselves, and this is how I'm going to say it, they manifest themselves as the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. And that's 3 beings. And we have 3 beings that are visiting this place that are Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka, which could be seen as archetypes for Obi-Wan being the father, Anakin being the son, and Ahsoka being the daughter. And through the entire arc, Obi-Wan is just trying to do what's right. He's just trying to figure out, you know, what to do, how to get Anakin and Ahsoka off of the planet, off of this place, like out of this place. Ahsoka's just trying to do what's right. And Anakin is wrestling with who he will become. And the son is constantly telling him, join me, do this, do that. No, don't be a Sith. We'll destroy the Sith, you know?
Yep.
He shows him, and this is actually a really cool part, a visual that I didn't see the first time I watched it. So we obviously have like lots of like yin and yang visuals throughout all of this, obviously. And this is interesting. George Lucas specifically wanted Ahsoka's transformation to be a griffin, and he specifically a griffin, right?
Sorry, the daughter.
Sorry.
The daughter.
Well, see, there we go. There I am mixing up the two. He wanted the daughter.
The daughter
to
turns into a griffin, and the son turns into a
gargoyle. Yeah. So he specifically called out those symbols, which is very odd. It makes sense for George, right? It makes sense for George.
Yeah.
So it could have been anything. They could have been any kind of good and evil archetypes, but he wanted those. So whenever Anakin descends into the middle of Mortis, he goes and he meets the sun, right? Into like the lava area. As he's descending, and I included like a screenshot of this in our notes, might have to kind of link this, but as he's descending down on his little like pod thing, it's a yin and yang symbol, and we saw
it's circular rings going down into the
it's
that's
circular
really
rings. Yeah, it's very specific. It's very much cylindrical, that pit that he's diving into, and then there are rings created because of that, and the center of it, there is what looks to be kind of this yin and yang. So in the lava is lit up. It's very white. And there's a stone in the lava. So there's a dark spot. And then there is a kind of a bigger dark spot that's where he ends up landing. And on the side of it, there's the symbol for the Sith, I believe, or symbol for the dark side, as is presented.
Symbol for the dark side in this location.
Right, in this location.
Yeah.
But that, in this particular instance, is representing the light in the dark.
Yeah.
So that's where Anakin lands, and that's where he talks to the sun about what he is to become, and that's where the sun gives him the vision of him becoming Vader. And he says, know yourself, know what you will become.
Yep. And there's an inevitability about him knowing the truth about himself that he feels like he goes dark to stop it.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. So it's like, no matter what, there was going to be an inevitability about the situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the sun literally was like, if you join me, we can destroy the Sith. We can destroy the Emperor. He said we can destroy the Emperor and keep this from happening. But Anakin chooses not to. And I wonder to this day, what if the daughter and the son were supposed to become one and become equals and become partners?
Like, what if, like, I ask this question all the time, which is, what if the dad had just died?
Yeah, and just let them
exist.
Fight.
Well,
yeah.
And if he hadn't called for outside change, right? Like, part of that was an introduction of change to the environment.
Yeah.
If he had just passed on, what would have happened? But it was his fear of losing control that caused, the downfall of his family. And so when I view this from, yes, this is Anakin, right?
Yeah.
This is Anakin's psyche that we're talking about. We're talking about his subconscious, what's going on. So he has a father figure. He has a sister who he loves in a sisterly way. And I think it's really important that the minister calls these the Mortis Gods, and that they're sometimes called the Father, Son. And
that was a really interesting giveaway there. They're sometimes called the Father, the Son, and the Daughter.
So they're not always called the Father, Son, and the Daughter.
That's what we can take away from it, I would think.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting Filoni clarification on his own mythos.
Yeah. Yeah, because...
Okay, cool.
We've been asking this from the beginning. Okay, where's the mom? Where's the missing mother of Mortis?
Where's the missing mother of Mortis?
But maybe that's not actually the right question. Yeah. Maybe it's not where's the missing mother. It's, hey, the mom isn't present in the Skywalker line. Therefore, it doesn't manifest itself when they go to it elsewhere.
Because elsewhere happens all... And especially with somebody like Anakin, who himself is a virgin in the Force. So this is why the father warns Obi-Wan that if he is the chosen one or if he isn't the chosen one, it is both equally dangerous because of his own power.
Yeah.
He is the chosen one, but it's still dangerous because of his power. Because Anakin himself is the Force. Anakin himself is an access point. He is the Force. Just like the tree on Dagobah. Just like Mortis, just like the world between worlds. He has it within him to probably go into the Force whenever he wants. And that's why he turns into a spirit very easily. Yeah. And the illusion between him being in one place or another, or being part of, the souls of the galaxy or not, there is no difference between the rock, the tree, the ship, yourself. It is all the Force.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I view this, and why it made me crazy. Why did Mortis make me crazy?
Why wouldn't it make you crazy?
Because it is telling us not only the story of the saga, right? It's telling us not the 6 movies that existed at the time and saying these are the things that are important, right? These are the things that we need to pay attention to. So the daughter is unable to be touched. There's a separation of the feminine itself. It's considered to be sacred and untouching. Every time the characters have access to sort of dreams or visions, they're either in a cave or they're having a dream. So they're telling us that even that is metaphor, right?
Yeah.
They are brought on by the sun, who is the shadow self, the subconscious, the things that we don't want to look at, the dark side, right? It is telling us that not only is this the story of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka told through the daughter, the son, and the father, but it's also telling us the story of Anakin and his two children in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
And the final confrontation with himself as father and turning back from the darkness, forgetting who he was, this dark person, and remembering himself differently at the end.
Well,
and that's, yeah.
Anakin is like so central to like everything, which is why it happens to be that he keeps coming up in every single conversation for when we're talking about our theories for the Rise of Skywalker, right? He is central to this idea of the Skywalker saga. Like George Lucas made that very prominent. And because we've seen him be a child and we've seen him grow up and we've seen him become Darth Vader. And now we kind of want to see him reunite with Padme. Gosh darn it. So,
yes.
So, but another interesting point though about like this kind of Anakin delving into his subconscious is that if we want to actually summarize it, like Mortis was created for Anakin, right?
Yes.
Like Anakin.
It did not exist before Anakin came there, and it did not exist after. I think that's very, very important to call out. And that's the same with the Yoda's Lost Mission.
Yes.
And we'll get into that in a moment. That is the same probably for the tree on Dagobah because Kylo ends up destroying it. So that's really important. It's also important to talk about the world between worlds because Ezra actually ends up destroying it. So these things exist momentarily as an access point to this elsewhere.
Another hint that this Mortis was specifically created for Anakin is the fact that the Mortis temple or castle that exists there
looks like his Vader's castle.
Like it's almost exactly the same.
It's gray.
Except it's gray. Yeah. It's symbolic of the fact that he can choose his path.
Yeah. And there's the dark side dagger, which is the legacy lightsaber.
Yeah.
You know, there's all of these like soft metaphorical things, and it's told in a dream-like way. Yeah. I think one of the most powerful moments is when the father has his children, so he commands his children to capture Ahsoka and Obi-Wan. And Ahsoka is captured by the dark side, and Obi-Wan is captured by the light. So there really is no difference in how this gambit is being played. And it's all taking place over this beautiful yin-yang type picture.
Yeah.
And up in the skies, there's these constellations, which is, again, connects us to the world between worlds eventually, as well as in the main hall, the father actually has portal-looking things that look like the portals in the world between worlds. So it's just, they're thematically telling you some things. And, you know, like another thing that Dave Filoni talked to Sam Witwer about was, if you feel like you're trying to sound Star Wars-y, go with that. Because he's like, so he jumps kind of between Maul and the sun and like, you know, the Emperor, and he kind of jumps kind of all over the place from a voice acting perspective, because he's trying to sound like all of these things. A gargoyle, which was a made up creature of all sorts of different parts. The griffin, which is a made up creature of all these different parts. You know, really interesting metaphorical symbolism there, right? Okay, so the father threatens choose one. Which do you choose, Anakin? Your apprentice or your master / father / brother? Right?
Yeah.
So the father is making Anakin choose. Which one do you choose? And Anakin, in his desperation, controls both.
But using the Force. I think Obi-Wan says to him, "You are an instrument of the Force, like use it," or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. But also, like he Obi-Wan tries to convince him to kill him. Same with Ahsoka.
Maybe.
Right?
Yeah. No, you're right. He does that, but then he says something about using the Force.
You are the chosen one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he uses the Force and he controls both of them, and time rapidly shifts around them. Sun rises and sets, right? The eternal tide, the in and out of the Force is manipulated.
Yes.
And he is able to let them go. And it proves to the Father and to Obi-Wan in this moment that Anakin is the chosen one. It's really important that both the Father and Obi-Wan are actually viewing this, because they are the same person, right? In this one lens of the Mortis arc. Anakin is able to let them go, but then he doesn't choose to stay. They try to leave. And that's when the daughter ends up getting,
sort of killed. Sort of
killed, but transferred to the next generation, right? There is a transference of a soul, right? So
it's telling us
really, really interesting.
What will happen?
Yes, it's telling us what will happen. Okay. So Mortis is also telling us what will happen in the sequel trilogy, and this is the part that makes me crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so threes are important. It is not just saying the father, son, and the daughter. It is also talking about dark versus divine.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally what the father is trying to do to the children is evil.
Yeah.
He is trying to control the natural aspects of them coming together to find the third way, right? So who is the father? He's
Palpatine.
the emperor.
Oh my God.
He's Palpatine.
Yeah.
Who is the son and the daughter? We have Anakin, we have Kylo, we have Padme, we have
Oh my
Rey.
God. Yeah. No, you're right.
It is the same story, okay? But like the problem is that you have to view it with the right mindset to view it. So if the emperor had not tried to control his children, naturally they come together because they love each other. And again, it's important that the minister says sometimes they're called the father, son, and the daughter, because not all the time are they. They are archetypes. They are fulfilling a role in the story. They are not literally a family.
Sometimes they're called the evil magician and the prince and the princess.
Yes. Sometimes they're called Sheev, Rey, and Kylo. Sometimes they're called Sheev, Anakin, and Padme.
Yeah.
Because it's ring theory.
Yeah. It's the story being told over and over again.
It's the story being told over and over.
Why was I focusing so much on where the mother was? 'Cause it's not even about that.
The mother is the planet. It is the universe. The mother is the universe. It is the whole thing.
So my theory from the beginning was the mother is the cosmic force, right?
Well, and it's again, not. I think it's what is the egg.
Yeah,
right? That is the mother. The mother is the whole.
I think it's the whole. I think it's everything, because I guess because if Rey can connect with the cosmic force, then that means it exists just as much as the Mortis Gods exist.
Yes.
So even if we believe there's a severance, even if we think there's this that the link between the cosmic force and the living force has been severed, right? Or if it's sick in some way, or that can all still be true.
I just think that it's trying to be controlled, like how the father is trying to control his children, right? Instead of allowing them to go on a journey together to find the truth, the path, the journey. The truth is in the try. He is trying to control them.
It's interesting because it's funny because neither of our ideas about it have changed from the beginning. You've always said, just get rid of the father. It'll be fine. I've always said they need to have a mother be manifest in some form or fashion.
I think the mother is there. I think the mother is there. She was never given form.
I think that's where we agree, and that's where it's okay, well, what is the solution? But it might not be about that.
I don't know.
It might just be that
it's
this whole concept of the Mortis Gods is all just conceptual, just based on who's there. It's all just a manifest of their ideas and their expectations and their needs. That's all it is.
Can we talk about how this story repeats in the World Between Worlds?
Yeah, couple of things though before we get there, because I wanted to just touch upon the idea of water, because I think it's like really, really interesting. The Mortis doesn't go into it, and I find that fascinating because it's more so manifest in the idea of lava.
Yeah.
So
I think it was
Mustafar.
because of a limitation of the animation at the time.
Yeah, and I think they wanted to draw parallels to like Mustafar, and I think they wanted to draw parallels to like Anakin's downfall, and I don't think like water like belonged there.
Water is very, very important.
Water is so important. And also, like, again, like we said before, like in Elsewheres, water is an important conduit for like between what is real and what is not. Like, it's like
Rey going into the mirror cave.
Yes.
Right? So like, let's talk about that. She goes in there and the water is crashing on that
lip of the
opening.
the lip of the opening.
The lip of the opening. She falls down and almost into a cavern, which shouldn't exist in that way, into the water, into the subconscious. And she sees a skeleton there, which is good job, Young. You really like skeletons in your subconscious. There you go. There's the skeleton. And she climbs out and she has a vision of what she thinks she needs, what she thinks she wants, but it's more that what she needs to hear.
And we never see Rey coming out of the cavern in the movie or in the book. Like, there is no showing her crawling out of the subconscious because it doesn't exist. Like, it's not a physical place.
She's never left herself. Like what Dave Filoni said about you're never very far from physically where you are. Because it's not about that.
The idea, like they literally tell us that by showing us that the water doesn't line up when she goes and she falls into the hole versus when she actually crashes into the water. The water does not line up. It's not a real place.
And like when Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka go into Mortis, they were gone for mere like half of a heartbeat.
Right. Time and place.
Time and place doesn't matter.
With Yoda going to what they call it the Wellspring of Life, right? This is a place where they say is one of many. They say it's one of many that exists where midichlorians originate. It is a place where it's a vergence of the Force, as you would say. And also it's interesting because in the physical representation of the planet, they have all of these what did I call it? Fungus. Yeah. Fungi.
Yeah.
Most of the flora, fauna of the planet is fungi. And what's funny about fungi is like it feeds upon death. So the Force Priestess explains to Yoda while he's there in her like 5 different manifestations, but she's all one person. She explains to Yoda that like death springs new life, and like that's kind of the lesson that he needs to learn while he's there. I don't know if he learns it, TBH, but I think that he
kills his own
shadow on the planet. So yes, he doesn't learn very much. And in fact, every single time the Force Priestess explains something to him, he goes, "Yes, I knew this already. Tell me more." Every single time. Like, he does it several times. He's like, "Yeah, I knew that. Just, okay, what else?" Like, no, you're stupid. Listen to her, please.
I love Yoda. He's like, I think that's why like his speech about failure is so like important to me, because Yoda is a big fat
He's a big fat failure. Exactly. He's a big dummy.
And yeah, he's a big dummy, and I love him, but he's an idiot boy.
Yeah, absolutely. I do wonder if like those episodes, like his Lost Missions episodes, I want them to tell me what that means from the perspective of the creators, because I want to know like, do you think that he found enlightenment? Because I don't think he did, and I think
it actually gave him more questions that he pondered when he was on Dagobah.
Yeah, I think that
because
was
he understood more in his exile, in his weird
way.
Well, like forced meditation time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because he was able to actually meditate on this.
Yeah, and I think like Dagobah becoming Dagobah was a place for him to be in exile spiritually, right? That was written before this idea of like the wellspring, and that the flora and fauna of Dagobah was a swamp.
Is
It's similar. It's a swamp. It's
because it swamps are filled with death that spring forth
and
life.
water. So in the Wellspring of Life that he goes to, there's this idea that everything that's there, every like plant that's there, all the vegetation is like that succulent type of thing, like that fungi. It holds a lot of water. It feeds upon death. Feeds upon microcosm, like in water and whatnot. Like, I don't know. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. But basically what I'm getting at is that all the symbols are there to show Yoda that that life feeds upon death and death feeds upon life. And like, it's a cycle that's going on. And the way that he responds to it is, yeah, I know all of this. And then all of the Force Priestesses personas say, I don't like him. Or like some of them say, like half of them say, I don't like him. He doesn't deserve our knowledge. And then the other half say, oh no, like let's put him through this. I like him, whatever. Like they're split on their idea of him. And so eventually the Force Priestess allows him to go through the trial, and then we see what comes of that. But
I think it's important to understand that, like, they see that even though he may not have gotten the whole message, he has enough to take with him. So when he goes to Dagobah, he will learn.
Because maybe they can see the future. Maybe they can see what will come of it.
Of course they can.
Of course they can.
Because in that moment, there is no difference between now and future and the past.
Yeah.
And they did it beautifully in the World Between Worlds.
Yeah, so then let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about the World Between Worlds. Because this is a weird amalgamation of everything that we've talked about. Because the World Between Worlds was not only set up as... It was
Ezra's
set up
journey,
as
his mini journey, but also to tie back all of these Force elsewhere concepts,
including preparing us for the Last Jedi.
The Last Jedi.
I think it was I think in a way because it was preparing us for Force Bonds. It was preparing us for Octo.
I mean, that was all season 3. This is season 4. They were preparing us for the Rise of Skywalker.
Wait, oh my God, you're right. Oh my God, I forgot.
So, okay, what's really interesting is that, yes, this happens in this very globe-like location. When he walks on the path, Ezra Bridger, these bridges, this is built for him. He creates ripples like water when he walks.
Oh, like water. There it is.
Yes, like water. He's walking along the bridge, and Ezra Bridger has always been this... I don't know, metaphor for bridging the eras. Era Bridger.
Ezra Bridger. Yeah.
Everyone's called this. So no, this is not his thing. But the idea that you can go and peek into these elsewhere locations, and there is no difference in the Force between now and then.
Yeah.
That's the quote unquote time travel, but it's not time travel, as Dave Filoni would say.
No.
It's that there is no difference in the Force. And the fact that he can see all of these things is a metaphor for Rebels, the Era Bridger, tying all of these stories together. Mm-hmm. Why is it important? Well, rings. These are all massive rings. It's all ring theory. It's telling you that this is all telling the story again and again. And we hear in the sound design the story again. Okay. Ezra enters into Elsewhere. He finds a spirit guide. Cool. The daughter. The daughter leads him to the fact that he needs to bring somebody else with him. He can't do this alone. You need your other half for this journey.
Wait, who's his other half?
In this moment, it's Ahsoka. He saves Ahsoka from death.
To be his other half.
For this moment, for this journey.
Okay.
They walk along the path trying to figure out what to do. He has a temptation to bring back somebody who has died, but it would change the time, basically. It would change the sacrifice, and it would mean something different.
Yeah. Which it would have changed him as well.
It would have changed him. Yeah. And in that moment, Ahsoka tells him, this isn't the right way. This isn't what this was meant to be. It's interesting that he was able to save Ahsoka, right? And immediately he felt like he wanted to save Kanan, but she tells him he can't.
Yeah, because Ahsoka was always meant to be, whereas Kanan was always meant to be sacrificed. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of these things are not changeable. And if you try to change them, it causes pain for the galaxy, basically. Then we see the Emperor attempt to connect with the two of them through a portal using a cauldron. Interesting. And his weird, cool blue smoke. And it's actually voiced by Ian McDermott, which is amazing. And what's really fascinating is we have a person attempting to control the location, and a woman and a man. A son and a daughter of the Force. Cool. And I'm going to deep dive into how Rebels has like foreshadowed tons of stuff, especially future interactions that Ezra has with the Emperor himself. But what it is saying is that this conflict, this pair, is important. And it's what Palpatine sees he is missing. There's this really great quote that I tweeted out the night before we recorded this, so it's been a couple of weeks, but Carrie Beck is talking about how we find out a little bit about what the Emperor is after and perhaps what he is missing. He wants power. He wants to access the source. He wants to become the ultimate power in the galaxy. Of course he does. He wants to get into the world between worlds because elsewhere is the access to the subconscious, to the Force. It is literally him being in there, but you can't go alone.
He needs Rey. Yeah. He thought he needed Ezra.
He sees, he thought he needed Ezra. He needs his opposite. He needs a pair. The pair of the feminine and the masculine.
He thought he just needed a power. He thought he just needed somebody who had power, who was
powerful enough in the Force.
But it's not just that. It's he needs his opposite. Yeah.
You need balance to go to the elsewhere. Out beyond wrong and right.
That's what Mortis was trying to tell Anakin, right? Like it was saying, hey, you're balanced now, but you're not always going to be, and you're going to need to make a decision. So his dark side was telling him, destroy both. Destroy the light and the dark or destroy the factions at least, because that's not good for anyone.
Which we see play out in Kylo's
and we see
words.
that there's a truth to it in a way, right? There's a truth to it in a way. And he's right in a way. Anakin was right in a way. He wanted to destroy both the Jedi and the Sith, and that's what his dark side was telling him in Mortis. That's what the son was telling him. You can do this. But he was like, no, I'm not gonna do that because the Jedi are important and they are keeping a peace to me right now.
But also ignoring like passion and drive and stamina and all of these things the Sith actually argue for.
So
is not also good.
But
as you push them to the extremes, that's when they become bad.
So let's go back to like Ahsoka and like what it means for her to have gone through this Mortis arc and like what she takes from it and the world between worlds. And what she becomes through all of her arc is fascinating to me. It's fascinating because she inadvertently is being taught this duality. Like what is this for Anakin? And then she, on her own accord, walks away from the Jedi and the Sith and the factions and all of that. She finds her own third path.
She is no Jedi. And I asked people because of the end scene in Rebels, and she comes back and she's in this white garb and she's got this staff. I'm like, what is the comparison to Lord of the Rings? Because
she's Gandalf.
Lord of the Rings is like one of Dave Filoni's huge things, and Stephen Colbert loves it, which means that it's very intelligent. And
there's relatability there.
But what it is because she's become somebody new. She has become the enlightened version of herself. She has become from the Gandalf the Grey, i.e., I am no Jedi, Ahsoka, to Ahsoka the White. Right, so it's that transition. She is that new version of herself because of the path of enlightenment.
Right. It's not pure, but it's new. It's new, and that's why it's white. New. It's not white because she's perfect and she is full of light. It's white because she is a new decision. She's a new choice that we have.
She is
she's trying.
She's trying. To walk the path.
Yeah, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Like, when I see like Ahsoka turn up like that, and the idea behind it, the plot behind it is let's go find Ezra. That's like when Gandalf shows up and says, "Let's go find let's go find the hobbits." That don't mean very much. Like, let's go find the ones that we sent off with this impossible task.
The ones people that we left behind.
Yeah.
Along the way. Yeah. Because they're still important, right? Even though they're not the main story, they're still important.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Let's go save the innocents.
And like I said in my Dark Crystal video that I made recently, like, she becomes a matriarch. She's the only individual out of all of the ones that we've seen so far that have experienced the elsewhere, other than Rey, that has not become a Force ghost, right? Like, she, like, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, Qui-Gon in a way. I don't think Qui-Gon's actually a Force ghost.
Well, we don't know what happens to Ezra, but probably he'll become a Force ghost at some point. He's a really powerful Force user. Like, we just have to acknowledge that. Like, but like, this is going to elsewhere, going to these places is a path of enlightenment. It is a journey into the self. It is understanding these things. It is exactly what Dave Filoni said, even though he didn't want to say it. I'm sorry I supercut you, but you said everything that at least helped us ask the right questions.
And I do wonder what that means, though. Like, because we've seen these men, we've seen these men like become Force ghosts, and then we see like Ahsoka, and she becomes like this priestess, this matriarch of sorts, and now we're seeing Rey undergo certain things as well.
Yeah, she's going white.
And I'm just like, okay, well, what does this mean as far as incorporating your feminine and incorporating your darkness, and where are we going? I don't know either. And I thought it was really interesting when we talked about it in our Shadow episode, and you said, well, I don't think that Force ghosts can reach perfect enlightenment. And it is interesting. I don't know where it's going, but we know that's going to change. We know through all of this, we know that's going to change. Force ghosts.
Something about the Force is going to change. Yeah.
It has to.
It begs the question of why was it not working before, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a new question to ask. Wow. This episode.
This has been a lot. This has been so much.
Yeah. So much. And I definitely encourage you, like, we didn't even dig into Dagobah and what Luke faces, really. We didn't dig into the Force bonds so much because they are something else, even though they are the same. They are in elsewhere. They are interconnecting through the Force, but it is actually something else. There's been some information that's come out from Secrets of the Jedi book written by Mark Sumerak about how Luke viewed the bond to be evil, but it's the Force allowing the bond to happen, which means it's just a tool of the Force, not necessarily that it's evil, Luke. It was just his perspective of it.
Interesting.
It could be used for evil. It's like, oh yes, I have a knife that's meant for cutting. I could also stab somebody with it. Okay, Luke. He viewed it as a dark side power. He categorized these things as light and dark, and I don't know that they should have been.
Yeah.
It's interesting, at least in the Secrets of the Jedi book, because it was all written from his perspective.
I want to, one more thing before we leave off. There's been the image that's been shared from that book of the Prime Jedi symbol. Yeah.
Prime Jedi?
So this has been weird. Like, but... Reese Clark's like, I'm going insane.
No, I think I know what it means, and it makes me kind of upset because it's good, and it just feels more like.
Wait, what do you think? Because you know what I said to you, but what did you think? So,
what did you think it was?
When Marie Claire sent me the image, which was shared on Twitter, like this was a Twitter thread that we had.
Yeah, this is also from
the Secrets of the Jedi book. But the image is like blue and red, but the red is like really bloody looking, and it's like around the edges, it's very bloody looking. And I, for some reason, upon instinct, was like, oh, like literally like blood, like the individual. It's all based on your individual notions. Like that's the point, right? That's what I said. I don't know if I'm right, but.
No, you might be. I mean, to me, there was blue, red,
and black.
White.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
So which ties to kind of the iconography that we have been seeing with the Jedi, the Sith, the Resistance, and the First Order. And Rey and Kylo, right? It's kind of all the same stuff. Okay. To me, you see two people who are corrupted by a third.
But, okay.
You're corrupted by the taint, the galaxy.
You think that's what the black is? I think the red is the individual. I think the blue is the cosmic.
No, I'm not even thinking about that. I'm actually thinking it's just Rey and Kylo and Palpatine.
I don't know. It could be both.
Because Kylo is entirely covered, plus part of his surroundings are covered. You can actually see part of his lightsaber.
No, I saw that, yeah.
And Rey is entirely surrounded.
I think that it could be both. And I think that...
It might be both. Yes, sometimes things are both.
We're in a transitionary period, right? We're going from the Force, meaning sins of the Father and your destiny and all this kind of stuff, to the individual
to the
deciding their own power.
The individual questions and okay, I'm looking at it again.
Blood could mean corruption. It could mean death. It could mean, but it could also mean
life. Like to the it also is a personal
everyone's
thing
blood
too.
Is different. Yeah,
sacrifice.
Yeah,
could mean lots of stuff. But either way, we're in this period of like big question marks until
big question marks.
But we know in base what these places are, and I suspect we're going to see some sort of version of this force travel, skywalking, i.e. through elsewhere.
Hell yeah.
In The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah. We're going to see elsewhere in The Rise of Skywalker. I don't think they're going to call it The World Between Worlds, because The World Between Worlds was very specific to Ezra's journey. Mortis was very specific. Mortis being death. for Anakin, right?
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to want to say, hey, like, you casual fans should have watched this show. Like, they're not going to want to say that. So it's going to be its own thing. It's going to be its own place. It's going to look entirely different.
They might call it skywalking. They might call it skywalking just to tie in.
I think it could be. Yeah,
that.
Absolutely.
That you become a Skywalker when you reach this personal enlightenment path and go into
I could see
elsewhere. That. I mean, lots of stuff to think about. I hope your brains are okay. I hope you came with us on this journey and you just weren't like noping out.
This is a long one, Marie Claire. This is so long.
I know,
but it was worth it. We had so much we had to talk through. This was a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at black_TYM, or they can find me on YouTube at Wit and Folly, WIT and FOLLY. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie Claire Gould, your host. Our music is the What the Force theme, orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We like to thank all our patrons, especially those that love What the Force, Night Huntress in Wild Space, Susan, and Jessica. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, on Facebook at What the Force Podcast, or on our website at whattheforce.ca. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.